Dramatizing Bach patients in Italy. This leads to some preliminary questions. What do we intend with dramatization? Why Bach patient and why Italy? For a long time, Italy had been considered a liminal country in the process of Bach revival, and only since the last decade it is more evident that although tardively, Bach received a significant attention both from the audience as well by cultural actors. Instrumental music represented the most natural bridge between Bach and the Italian world historically, while the separate repertoire lay almost unknown for a long time. There have been only a few exceptions, the Mass in B minor, the Magnificat, and the Passions. A special love was reserved in Italy for Bach's Passions, praised for their merit to represent, I quote, the world as drama, spirit, blood, thought, and flesh. The first performances plunged their roots to the turn of the 20th century. Since that moment, they have been performed continuously in Rome, while represented more exceptional events in other towns. However, Passions only found their space in concert seasons, eventually located in churches and penned during the Lent period. And Mexico deal with some original stage and audiovisual dramatization on St. John and Matthew Passions, realized with the cooperation of Italian composers, directors, and institutions across the 20th century. The first production here in this class was by Ferruccio Busoni, who in 1921 projected a mise-en-scène of St. Matthew Passion. This did not represent a new idea for Busoni, who was working on his dramatic works in those years, and in 1919 shared some critical thoughts about Bach's Passions with the Swiss pianist and composer Hans Huber. Unfortunately, Busoni's conception never came to light. Nevertheless, a few documents allow us to get an image of the hypothetical staging. From the musical point of view, the more drastic intervention was on cutting the areas, as Mendelssohn did in Berlin's historical performance. Indeed, Busoni considered the areas as the paralyzing, desecrating moment, the contemplation of the bigoted dictate. And this should not surprise, since it is well known how much, in the early 20th century, musical director cut, replace, and supplement with gusto long pieces of music in their productions. As regards the theatrical point of view, Busoni himself sketched the scenography of a Gothic castle which would have hosted the Passion. Protagonists acted in front of the main entrance, and full-size crosses were left on a raised walkway. The orchestra played from the musical gulf. Busoni's idea of an operatic Passion reappeared in 1985 during the European Year of Music, when the National Committee for the celebration announced this production as the most original Italian contribution to Cantor's anniversary. 6 months apart, the Teatro La Fenice in Venice and the Teatro alla Scala in Milan proposed an operatic version of St. John Passion, directed by Pierluigi Pizzi, and the staging of St. Matthew Passion under the direction of Yuri Lubimov. The Venetian production was set in the main hall of the Teatro La Fenice, transformed into a Baroque Bavarian church. Protagonists acted the story of St. John Passion on a long nave built on a platform traversing the parterre long ways. The Baroque orchestras played under the royal stage, while the evangelist was placed on a pulpit. The audience took part to the performance from the small stages of one of the most beautiful Teatro all'Italiano. Instead, the Teatro alla Scala moved its operatic season to the Milanese Catholic Church of San Marco to stage the St. Matthew Passion. The distinctive trait of this setting was an enormous ice cross that melting draped by representing Jesus' and humanity's pain. Characters moved in the transept, and the stage depth was attained by reflecting panels which vaguely unveiled what happened on the scene behind them. The Passion was performed by a smaller ensemble from the Symphonic Orchestra of La Scala. In the same year, the Italian choreographer Vittorio Biagi, étoile di Opéra Comique de Paris, proposed, together with the Teatro Massimo di Palermo, a St. John Passion Dance performance. This was not unseen in Europe since only 4 years before John Neumeier premiered his choreography of St. Matthew Passion at the Hamburger Staatsoper. Nevertheless, it is interesting that such a project reached a peripheral venue like the Teatro Politeama in Palermo, Sicily. Biagi addressed his attention finding an equilibrium between his will to stage a human story despite the supernatural context of a sacred representation. Pride personified human destiny, and therefore the actor performing this role attended only a few rehearsals and went on stage without being well informed about what would happen during the performance. Crowds were represented by masses of dancers wearing anonymous white leotards. And moreover, the choreographer integrated the drama with three personifications of an angel, of St. Peter's consciousness, and of Christian suffering souls. Between Busoni's project and 1985 dramatization, Bach's Patience have been integrated into another interesting audiovisual production. In 1949, precisely 1 year before the bicentenary of Bach's death, the Roman producer Campidoglio Film and the director Ernest Marischka proposed, I quote, the first cinematographic version of an oratorio, namely of St. Matthew Passion. Music was conducted by Herbert von Karajan and performed in Italian by local operatic singers and the symphonic orchestra of the Accademia Nazionale di Santa Cecilia in Rome. The visual component consisted in the scrolling of paintings by some renowned Renaissance and Baroque artists representing Jesus' torture, crucifixion, and burial. Moving from these experiences, I would now to focus on some problematic aspects tied to the transfer of Baroque oratorios born to the Lutheran liturgy in a stage or cinematographic setup. First of all, let's focus on the libretto. Everyone in the Western world knows the gospel story of Jesus' martyrdom, and many attended a rite of the Via Crucis. Therefore, it was not difficult for the audience to recognize the story under representation. However, it is much more complicated for a non-German speaking modern audience to appreciate the gospel as told by the evangelist or to understand the literal meaning of Picander's text and its related religious and cultural values. Indeed, the relationship with the libretto remained problematic in every project. Busoni hypothesized to cut areas. Marischka movie Bach's Passion was translated into Italian, and by following the local tradition, many recitatives had been cut, so much that the film was 95 minutes instead of 3 hours length. The same has been done in Biagi's choreography, who concentrated on emotion expressed by the arias and chorales. Italy and Ubimov deserved a more respectful approach to Bach's text. Still, they tacitly renounced to allow their public to understand and follow the libretto, which was sung in German but translated into Italian in the booklet, so that the audience was in the dark during the performance, and it was impossible to read the lead booklet. The second issues concern the transposition of Bach's Passions in a stage dimension. This aspect deals with two sub-matters. On the one side, this entails problems in common with any other dramatization of oratorios that have been conceived far from the stage. On the other side, there are cultural issues linked to the transposition of a Lutheran oratorio on a Catholic country. As clearly discussed by Monica Hanneman in her definition of operatorio, despite, I quote, the tendency to abominate rather than applaud stage settings of oratorios and cantatas is solidly entrenched in the literature, the practice of staging oratorios and related works was bound up with the very birth of the genre and continues to represent to the present day in major venues throughout the world. With this regard, Busoni's project represents one of the very first attestations of the crossover between liturgical values and staging interest linked to Bach's passions. That said, as we know, these works were conceived as entirely not dramatic, therefore they set some problems. First of all, areas are not assigned to specific characters, and it is not assured a relationship of cause-effect among the texts according to the same voice register. With this regard, John Bach explains, and I quote, one of Bach's most potent means of achieving this particular function lies in his provision of areas that evoke a definitive human subject in the present, someone who does not represent a character in the story, but who belongs very much to our world. Thus, Bach adapts an operatic convention, the area, which represents the person and thoughts of a specific character within a time-bound musical frame, towards the development of a personage that relates to the listeners off stage rather than to the historical characters on stage. And in light of this, it is interesting to observe how different directors react to these issues. Considering the choirs, Busoni imagined a static space for the choirs placed in two mezzanine floors on the opposite side of the scenography, while Pizzi, for example, identified two diverse areas in the Venetian production to set the singers while acting as turbe or as faithful. And in particular, he placed the turbe around the crosses while chorales were sung in the prominent space of the platform. Regarding indeed the relations voice character, Pizzi assigned one character to each soloist, while, for example, Yubimov made it something more traditional, hence he managed with a much more complicated work such as the St. Matthew Passion, assigning more characters to single voices and renouncing to trace an univocal relation singer role. These complexes of religious, sonic, textual, and visual levels also informed the realization of the 1949 film where paintings were selected and ordered to propose a tangible vision of Jesus' story. But what it is interesting here is that Christ, Peter, Magdalena, and others from the Gospel were not represented univocally, but throughout the aesthetic lens of diverse artists. A parallel aspect influencing all these attempts to dramatize Bach's passion is the relationship with the sacred dimension. As explained before, none of them has been thought as a liturgical occasion nor a religious circumstance. The Venetian and Milanese stage production as Busoni's one were intended as suppletive as operatic show, and they both tried to create a spiritual rite into a social ritual. Their premieres were completely untied with the Lent period. Pizzi's performance premiered in December, while Yubimov one in June. And in particular, the St. John Passion was planned to open the new operatic season, namely to represent a significant social and mediatic secular appointment. And at the same time, the Milanese St. Matthew Passion was marked by very active troubles since La Scala was involved in an epochal strike that obliged the direction to postpone the premiere of the performance. So although adopting different strategies, all these two productions, considering the sacred dimension of Bach's work by creating spaces and atmospheres that could recall spiritual and religious suggestions, and both concentrate the imagination on the Christian symbol of the crux. A particular discourse, for example, concerns the performance represented in Venice. Since on that occasion, Pizzi worked in the direction of an ecumenical Catholicized reading of Bach's Passion. Indeed, while singers and choirs acted the Passion, other extras wore vestment as bishop and prelate, and simulated the rite of the Via Crucis, playing gestures of the Catholic Church, and such as prostration in front of the altar and the consecration of the host. Another discourse concerns the movie directed by Marischka. From the visual point of view, he found us the sacred subject as the leitmotif, but a much more compelling awareness of the religious value of Bach's works is evident by considering the communicational and reception strategies elaborated by the producer Campidoglio Film to disseminate the movie. Indeed, the success of Marischka's film was signed by the appreciation of some essential Catholic international and Italian organizations, including the International Office for the Catholic Cinematography, which defined the movie, and I quote, the 1950s world that is contributing the most to the deepening of religious feeling in society. Before concluding, I would like to share with you some consideration born from the question, what did all this dramatization of Bach's Passion mean if looked in the frame of the vaster Bach's perception process? The institution and all those who make culture feel a lively interest and love for the Leipzig composer. For example, in April 2020, the Teatro Regio in Turin planned a new theatrical production of St. Matthew Passion on the occasion of the Holy Friday. Unfortunately, COVID-19 made it impossible, and we hope to assist in its exciting production soon. But this is an attestation that the idea of operatic dramatization of Bach's Passion is still actual. Then it is evident that a particular role had been played by the Catholic Church, which still has in Italy a profound influence in its diverse form of widespread religiosity. With this regard, there is a unique feature of Catholicism that is particularly significant while examining dramatization. Historically, indeed, the Catholic Church attributed a great spiritual value to the sacred images, so much that in the Second Vatican Council in 1963 still admonished that, and I quote, the practice of placing sacred images in churches for the veneration of the faithful should be maintained. Catholics are used to visualize acts of violence linked to Christ and saints' martyrdom. And this is undoubtedly one reason why directors had no concern to represent scenes of Jesus' passion and death at the cost of exceeding for didacticism and voyeurism. Moreover, it is well known that the Italian audience is used to a three-dimensional approach to the music by facing centuries of operatic tradition, which are perceived on the basis of the constructing of the national self. Indeed, it is not casual that two of the dramatization under scrutiny had been conceived as the Italian most coherent homage to Bach on the occasion of the European Year of Music. And the importance in numerical and ideological terms of these Italian experiences of dramatization of Bach's Passion emerges if compared with other countries. But this aspect is much more evident if we look at the inclination, this dramatic inclination in the broader context of Bach's reception phenomena. In Italy, dramatization became a form of compensation in front of Bach's repertoire, which seemed fascinating as tricky. Since the early 20th century, on the occasion of the first broad wave of interest for Bach in Italy, critics started to talk about the need to Mediterraneize the cantor's music. The answer was funded by translating words with German libretto and asking Italian performers and conductors to make them closer to the mainstream opera. After the Second World War, both the much wider dissemination of these recorded by famous German performers and the growing process of globalization of the musical market invigorated those people claiming a more authentic approach to Bach, giving life to new tendencies of a critical absorption of foreign stimuli. In the 1985 stage projects, of patience became a sort of mediation between these two instances, which never stopped. In the verse form, both La Fenice and La Scala cope with the request of a partially historically informed performance of Bach's Passion or authentic performance, at least on a sonic point of view. But from the other side, they identified in the dramatization the best resource to imprint their production an original mark and to approach the cultural sensibility of their audiences. And it is in light of this consideration that today it seems more inappropriate to accuse such operation as illegitimate. On the contrary, these phenomena of dramatization are one way the Baroque repertoire has reached the general public and one of the keys that have been able to make it perceived closer and more meaningful. And it is why it is more and more important to consider them, study them, and understand their deep meaning. Thank you very much.